Bungie has buffed this exotic and aspect, and let me just say, it's way better than it was before. To sum it up, all they did was that they increased the range and travel distance from the aspect and also the exotic gauntlet. So when builds are mostly primarily towards melee abilities, we most likely think to use Monte Carlo. But in this video, we're not using Monte Carlo, we're using something different. If you find this video helpful, be sure to hit that like button and also subscribe. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's first start on the exotic gauntlet, Pyrogale Gauntlets. Here's what it does. So it would, one, modify the burning maul into a single-use slam that deals 650% increased damage, and it would also release 3 tracking waves. These waves create a cyclone on impact, and it would also track enemies as well. So this is kind of like the Thunder Crash exotic chest piece that would buff the damage even further, but it's on the solar instead. So whenever you proc the waves, it would apply 20 Scorch on impact, but if you are using this fragment called Ember of Ashes, it will bump it up to 60 Scorch on hit. And also when you spawn in the cyclones, it will deal 20 damage every 0.2 seconds. So we are using the aspect called Consecration. So if we were to have this exotic gauntlet on, here's what it does. Whenever you proc Consecration, it does not have the tracking feature, but it will retain the scorching capability. So if an enemy goes into your cyclone, it will continuously scorch that target. So overall, this exotic gauntlet enhances the features for Consecration and the super that we're going to be using, aka Burning Maul. So for the Titan subclass, you're going to need to use Swordbreaker, and what I just mentioned for the super ability, be sure to put Burning Maul because it would, 1, scorch targets, and 2, cause tons of ignitions. And the base cooldown for this super is 8 minutes and 20 seconds. And for the class ability, I do recommend going for Rally Barricade just because of the base cooldown, which is much less than Towering Barricade. And for the solar melee, you can choose any of the 2 you like, but for me, I'm using Throwing Hammer. And for the solar grenades, I chose to put Healing Grenade because for this build, we are not going to be having that much healing. So by having this, it would help us even further. For the aspects, of course, we're going to use Consecration because if you don't use this, you're missing out on the opportunity because this is very insane. Here's what you should do to proc this aspect. You're first going to slide, then as you're doing so, be sure to press your charge melee ability to launch yourself into the air. And as you're doing that, enemies in front of you will be affected by scorching effects. And as soon as they are scorched, as you're in midair, hit your charge melee again to slam down onto the floor to make another wave of flames. And as soon as you do that, that enemy that was scorched will cause an ignition and also spawn in a cyclone. And for the second aspect I'm using is Roaring Flames. So this is the aspect that would help you increase your damage output for your solar abilities. But in order for you to proc this, you're, 1, going to get a final blow with your solar abilities or getting ignition kills. And you can be able to stack this up to 3 times. So let's start on the fragments. There are 4 in total. The first one is called Ember of Benevolence. Applying Restoration, Cure, or Radiant to your teammates grants increased grenade, melee, and class ability regeneration for a short time. And it would also give you -10 discipline. The second fragment is Ember of Searing. Defeating scorched targets grants melee energy and also creates a fire spray. And this one will also give you +10 recovery. The third fragment is Ember of Torches. Powered melee attacks against combatants make you and your nearby allies radiant. And the last fragment I put is Ember of Empyrean. Solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you, but you would also get -10 resilience. And they also buffed this fragment, so it would increase the maximum duration from 12 seconds all the way up to 15. So it's now gonna last 15 seconds longer. And also, if you were to kill a minor combatant with solar weapons, the time that increases is going to be low. But if you were to kill a high value target such as champions, the extension for that time is going to increase even further. So if you do want to take advantage of this fragment, be sure to kill high value targets such as champions. If you'd like to check out the build for yourself, the dim link will be in the description. So let's talk about the weapons. There are 2 weapons that would help you generate even more melee energy. Let's first start on the kinetic weapon. I'm using this Strand shotgun, in which you can get this from the Crota's End raid. And here are the perks that you should be running. The main perk you're going to want to run is Pugilist, because final blows with this weapon generates improved melee energy. And if you were to deal melee damage, it would briefly improve this weapon's handling. So in total, whenever you get a melee kill, it would grant 10% melee ability energy. But if you are using a shotgun, in which case we are, it would bump that up to 20%. And you would also be granted 35 handling for 3 seconds whenever you deal damage with your melee ability for this shotgun. And the next perk I chose to put is Sword of Logic, just to increase my damage even further. Final blows with this weapon grants bonus damage for an improved duration. The strength and duration of the bonus increases when more powerful targets are defeated. And what's cool about this shotgun is the origin trait, which makes this build even better for this shotgun. It's called Cursed Thrall. After defeating a target with a melee attack, final blows with this weapon causes targets to explode for a short duration. So we are getting consecration kills, which equivalates to melee kills. So every time we would get a kill from that, it would always proc Cursed Thrall. And for the energy weapon, I'm using the solar hand cannon called Zaouli's Bane. And again, for the first perk column, be sure to run Pugilist. But for this one, instead of getting 20% for each kill, you are going to be getting 10% melee energy. And for the next perk column, be sure to run Incandescent. Defeating a target spreads Scorch to those nearby. More powerful combatants and opposing guardians cause Scorch in a larger radius. Because if I were to use Monte Carlo for this build, I'm mostly going to be using that weapon non-stop if I do want to get tons of melee energy. But in this case, we have two weapons, so you can choose either or, instead of just focusing on one weapon. And for the exotic weapon I chose to put for my power weapon is this solar grenade launcher called the Parasite. And here's what it does. The weapon perk is called the Worm Byproduct. Taking damage from your own worm projectile detonation empowers your weapons for a short time. And for the intrinsic trait, it's called the Worm's Hunger. This weapon fires hive worms which explode on impact. The size and damage of the explosion scales with the number of enemies you've defeated just before firing this weapon. So the max amount you can hold for Worm's Hunger is times 20. So if you do want to increase your damage even further, be sure to go up to times 20 for this grenade launcher. Now let's head to the seasonal artifacts. For the second column, I'm using Flame, Fiber, and Freeze. Combines the Solar/Strand Siphon mods into one. The next one is Kindling Trigger. Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants. And for the third column, I'm using Flint Striker. Rapid Solar Precision Hits and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows grants Radiant. And the last one is Heart of the Flame. Casting your super grants nearby allies Radiant and increases the damage of your super for each nearby ally. On the fourth column, I'm using Unraveling Orbs. Picking up an Orb of Power grants strand weapons unraveling rounds. This one is very good for the shotgun we are using. And the next one is Revitalizing Blast. Causing damage with your solar ability weakens champions and bosses for a short duration. And on the fifth column, I'm using Horde Shuttle. Damaging unravel targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a threadling. And the last one is Rays of Precision. While Radiant, Solar Precision Final Blows causes combatants to ignite. And for the stats, I do highly recommend going for Strength, because if you were to have tier 10 Strength, your melee ability cooldown will be all the way up to 45 seconds instead of a minute and 31 seconds. And for the second stat, I do recommend going for Resilience, because if you do have tier 10, you would get a 30% damage reduction. Let me explain the main ones so you guys got to know. On the gauntlets, I am using melee kickstart. If you don't know what it does, it basically consumes your armor charges. It will transfer that into melee energy. So for the chest, I am running charged up to give me an extra slot for an armor charge. So instead of having 3, we are now going to be having 4. If you find this build helpful or fun, be sure to hit that like button and also subscribe. I'll greatly appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, evening, or afternoon. Take care and peace. If you need help in Destiny 2, follow my live streams.